The gentlewoman yields back. Gentleman from Ohio, Mr.
And how many taxpayers are potentially harmed by the hacking and the
with regard to that company right now?
Yeah, what I can say is, I mean, we look at past performance, we look at responsibility metrics. There are criteria that we have to look at in terms of the process. But
well, I don't know by number the executive order or the rollback that just took place as it relates to looking back at a company's business and reputation. But I think that's something that you need to look at to see whether or not it does negatively impact your ability to ensure that the best is taking care of the best.
Absolutely.
Thank you. With that, I yield back.
The gentlewoman yields back. Gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Jordan's recognized for 5 minutes.
I thank the chair. Mr. Corbin, when did the IRS notify TIGTA that you guys had a problem?
So the notification to TIGTA for the incident on February 27th happened that same day.
So you guys talked to Mr. Camus and his guys on February 27th of this year?
I did not personally talk to Mr. Camus, but someone at the IRS did. Yes, sir.
And how many taxpayers are potentially harmed by the hacking and the breach that took place?
Approximately 100,000, sir.
100,000 people. And then the law requires you to notify Congress when something like this happens, doesn't it?
I'm not familiar with that, sir.
Well, I'll read it to you. This is a letter from your boss, Mr. Koskinen. The Federal Information Security Modernization Act and criteria provided in the Office of Management and Budget Guidance says this, that not later than 7 days after the date of an incident, you should notify Congress, right?
Correct, yes, sir.
Okay. So you're supposed to do it, and you're supposed to do it within 7 days. Is that accurate?
That sounds accurate, yes, sir.
Okay. It doesn't just sound accurate, that's the law.
Yes,
so
sir.
when did you tell Congress?
So I believe we notified Congress within that 7-day time frame, from what I know.
Really? Is that true, Mr. Camus?
Mr. Jordan, I'm not sure when they made notification to Congress.
Because we don't have it until April 6th, which is a lot longer than 7 days. You learn on February 27th, you tell Congress on April 6th. Mr. Corbin?
I'd have to go back and check that, Congressman.
Well, that's important, right?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Koskinen testified on April 6th, and that's when he told us. Testified in front of the Senate.
Yes, Congressman, I have to go back and take that back and confirm that for you, sir.
Well, I don't know that. Well, we appreciate that, but this is when Congress first learned, was on April 6th, that there had been an incident. And here's what the statute says. It says, not later than 7 days after the date on which there is a reasonable basis to conclude that a major incident has occurred. Would you describe this as major, Mr. Camus?
The fact that it impacted potentially 100,000 people, I would say so.
Same here. So we're wondering why you waited so long.
I don't have an answer for that, Congressman. I'll go back and find out for you.
We'd like to get that because, frankly, well, let me turn to Mr. Camus. Mr. Camus, is this the first time the IRS has waited to tell Congress some important information?
Mr. Jordan, I'm not aware. I can't answer your question.
Well, maybe I'll refresh your memory. There was a little incident that happened over the last several years where the Internal Revenue Service systematically and for a sustained period of time targeted taxpayers based on their political beliefs. You familiar with that situation, Mr. Camus?
I am familiar with that.
You did an investigation into that, didn't you?
Yes, sir.
A couple of investigations, didn't you?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. And was the IRS always forthcoming in a timely fashion with important information in that investigation you did, Mr. Camus?
We found that there were some mistakes that were made and some materials that should have been turned over. That's
well,
correct.
that's a nice way of saying I appreciate that. You got maybe a career in politics after you're done at TIGTA, Mr. Camus, with that answer. Let me just refresh your memory. The IRS knew there was a gap in Lois Lerner's emails in February of 2014. They did nothing to stop the destruction of backup tapes, actually 421 backups. Do you remember this, Mr. Camus?
Yes, sir, I do.
Because it was your investigation that discovered they destroyed 421 backup tapes, right?
That is correct, sir.
Potentially 24,000 emails, right?
Yes, sir.
And that all happened in March of 2014, a month after they knew there was a gap in our emails. Mr. Koskinen testified in April of 2014. But you know when he told Congress? June 13th, 2014. Is that right, Mr. Camus?
That's correct.
So here we have again the Internal Revenue Service, an agency that has a little bit of influence and impact on American people's lives, with a major breach that the law says you're supposed to tell Congress within 1 week, within 7 days. And what do? They wait 38 days. And you know what? Here's what, to add insult to injury, think about what Mr. Walker, Congressman Walker, just talked about. All the suspicious activity that took place before February 27th. In fact, when Mr. Koskinen testified and said, oh, we're putting you on notice, Congress, that there's been a major breach, 100,000 taxpayers potentially impacted, look at what he said in that testimony. He said this, April 6, 2017, Mr. Koskinen testifying in front of the Senate Finance said, quote, we started working with education in October, telling them we were very concerned that the system could be utilized by criminals. So, Mr. Koskinen was on notice that there was problems, potential big problems. He even used the term very concerned clear back in October of last year. We have the major breach take place on the 27th when the IRS tells you, hey guys, we got to look into this. This is real. We've had all these things happen, suspicious activities ahead of time, and they don't comply with the law and tell Congress within a week. They wait 38 days to tell us. It's not supposed to be how it works, is it, Mr. Camus?
Does not sound so.
No,
sir.
and the IRS, once again, the IRS is treating taxpayers the way they're not supposed to, and it's why this committee has been so focused on trying to clean up the mess over there, and frankly, I've been so focused on saying Mr. Koskinen has to go. With that, I yield back, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Jordan. Ms. Plaskett, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
I want to thank the lovely chairwoman this morning for the opportunity to speak. Thank you all for being here. Of course, everyone on both sides of the aisle are very concerned about this issue. Most of us have children and have our own student loans or have loans that we're helping with the children that we care very much about our future as well as our constituents. I did, however, just wanted to touch on something that I know one of my colleagues spoke about just a few moments ago, Mr. Runcie, when they talked about the lawsuit with Avient. It is, however, understood that this is a lawsuit, so the interest of both parties, they both have allegations raised. But Navient does have a lower default rate than some of the other users or loan companies that, and they do have a propensity to loan to minority and underserved communities. Is that correct? I understood that the default rate of the students who have loans with Navient is significantly lower, potentially, than some of the other loan companies.
I would have to confirm that, and a lower default rate is better. Right. Yeah.
Yes.
So I'd have to confirm that.
Okay.
And I know the portfolios aren't all the same. They have different compositions, and so sometimes there would be natural differences in the default rates for the various services.
Sure. Okay. The one thing that is really interesting as well, Mr. Runcie, when we're talking about the Inspector General's report, it seems, something that we're all very focused on. And the IG warned that the systems were, and I quote, being misused by commercial third parties to take over borrower accounts. This is something that Ranking Member Cummings talked about. These are things that we are really very keen on because these are, of course, students who are navigating a very difficult system. This is sometimes some of the first instances where they're really delving into their own finances, making decisions that are going to have an impact on them for the rest of their lives. So the commercial third parties are student loan companies and student loan consolidators. Is that correct when we're talking about the third parties that take over borrowers' accounts? And less than 2 weeks ago, this committee conducted an interview with the special agent in charge of conducting that investigations for the IG, and he explained to the committee that the information in these students' accounts is, quote, of commercial interest for loan consolidators. Right?
Yes.
And that word commercial interest is very key to me. He also told us that student loan companies, and I quote, were controlling thousands of accounts or creating thousands of accounts and controlling them. Mr. Runcie, is this true? Were student loan companies actually using the information of individuals they are there to serve in a manner to control for commercial interests those accounts?
Yes, my understanding is that it's a fee for service, and so to the extent that they've got 1,000 clients, they're being charged for those services, so it would be a commercial endeavor.
And do you have a list of the names of those companies that were doing that?
We've identified some. I don't know that we have an exhaustive list of those companies.
Ms. Chairwoman, may I ask that we obtain a list of every student loan company that were involved in the activities? And Mr. Runcie, how long would it take you to provide something like that to the committee?
I don't want to commit because I'm not sure how readily available
Come
that
on, you
information
can't give me
is.
like, an outside range time or anything like that? No? A week, 2 weeks, a month?
I'd say if you give us a month, that would be appreciated.
Of course, he went to the outside of what I requested.
Hey, I don't want to negotiate against myself.
Got you. Very good. The special agent in charge also told us that student loan companies were, I quote, aggressively pursuing account holders and taking advantage of this. That sounds outrageous. And could you explain to me, not just what the aggressively pursuing, but what did he mean by taking advantage of them?
I don't want to speculate, but, to the extent that they're providing services and they have account information, they can receive correspondence on their behalf and make decisions on their behalf, and those decisions might benefit them commercially.
And are any of these same companies still doing business with the Department of Education?
Not that I know of.
Okay. Mr. Chairwoman, we have a responsibility to help protect students from the kind of abuse, and I'm so very pleased that we are having this hearing to go through this. And I believe the entire committee is very keen on holding a follow-up hearing within the next with the student loan companies that are actually engaged in these activities. And I hope that we could have the IG from the Department of Education testify about what they've found. Thank you very much for the information that you've provided us, and I hope, Ms. Chairwoman, we're able to do that. I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Platt.